What were the final days of drug addiction like for me? What was my rock bottom like? Most people that have been drug addicts will tell you that there are interludes, periods, maybe even entire narratives that feel kind of exciting. I had to look back at some of my written material, books and stuff to remind me of the atmosphere of addiction, because now, with one day at a time, God willing, almost 18 years clean, I feel so ensconced in the spiritual life that's about letting go not only of substance dependency but various forms of behavioural addiction, and also, let's face it, the ego itself. I don't mean, obviously, I don't have an ego. It would be preposterous to say that, wouldn't it, while sitting here in a waistcoat and this little neckerchief thing. What I mean to say is that I recognise my ego as a fragment of my whole beingness, not the dominant force in my life. Over the course of any day, I'm likely to slip up, but what I say is that I've got a place to return to, a place that is not predicated by my wants, preferences, needs, dislikes. This is done with, in my case, a great deal of practice and assistance and help. Now, I had a pretty typical addiction journey. I started by sort of smoking grass and hash, as was very popular at that time, and immediately full on embraced the identity of a drug addict with zeal and enthusiasm. I think because I was in a great deal of spiritual pain, loneliness, despair and worthlessness. As the great Eckhart Tolle says, addiction begins with pain and addiction ends with pain. That's the cycle of it. And I suppose, like many people with addiction issues, there was sort of like the purpose that I now sort of recognise as being a kind of a spiritual impulse, a yearning for connection, oneness, transcendence, call it what you will, in a sort of working in tandem with this self-destructive impulse. Perhaps recovery comes when these two things can align and weave together into a single thread for you to walk, i.e. the self-destructiveness of a drug addict could be regarded as an unconscious and not theologically sanctioned attempt to annihilate the persona, to experience the freeness of liberated awareness, i.e. not continually existing through the filters of the perceived self. But when you're just a junkie, that's obviously not how it feels. Yeah, now I feel like these two forces, these two sources are somewhat in alignment. They are not two at all. In fact, they are one. There's something very particular about the secondary worlds of drug addiction, like houses that are essentially crack houses where all that's happening is drugs are being dealt from that place. I remember one place in particular with a person in bed and people collapsed in corridors and hanging out and using there and feeling pretty scared and brittle and exposed, because I guess one of perhaps the peak of my using was where I was working on MTV, so I was earning really good money, I'd get like 500 quid a show, but I was deteriorating mentally. This was a time that was very rich in stories, sort of running out of the studio and jumping up and down on the boss's car and being all crazy and stealing the riders of artists when I was doing MTV festivals. And I suppose most notoriously, I believe the day after 9/11, dressing up as Osama bin Laden and interviewing Kylie Minogue. I guess the footage must be out there somewhere. And taking my drug dealer and his kid to work with me that day. I'm a codependent person, meaning that I have a tendency to blur the boundaries in relationships, and as a drug addict that was no less evident in my character. And I suppose the drug dealer, Gritty, to give him his name, was someone that I saw most days. And I remember meeting him and his kid and going, yeah, come into MTV with me. I got properly wasted and high and just wore a camo jacket, a tunic thing that I'd got from around Bethnal Green. I think I put on some sort of turban and maybe a fake beard. It was a pretty insane thing to do in retrospect, and even really at the time. As I've often said, with the addition of significant amounts of stimulants and opiates, your ability to make decisions is, if not impeded, certainly altered. And, really that time was full of real sort of giddy, stupid, anecdotal madness, like that business there, or waking up in a room full of refugees and not knowing how I'd got there, and getting arrested and finding myself in cell. Lots of absolute insanity and madness. because I suppose I was trying to elevate myself beyond the feelings of, fear and pain, the moment when it sort of got out of hand was when I got caught using at a sort of a, I remember I was on the outskirts of show business then, and I was at my agency that looked after me had a party, and there was sort of like people off the telly there, and I was using heroin in the toilet with a homeless guy. And that's when people started to ask questions about the nature of my drug use. And I met someone who's like a 12-step sort of authority, an expert, got assessed, found out about my drug use. And then I had to sort of look at, what is your plan for life? Most people, like in addiction, even if it's not as an extreme a form of addiction as crack and heroin, and mine, it would have got a lot worse. It was only really sort of a 3-year period where it was getting really dicey. But having said that, the drinking and the weed and the recreational drug use was getting me into a lot of trouble even before that. The absolute pinnacle of it was a moment where I was told I was going to be going into a treatment centre. You're going into a treatment centre, said my then manager, the patriarchal force that he was. You're going into treatment. And I didn't want to, and it was December, and I looked out the window and saw the branches of this tree and a sparse grey Camden town sky, bleak, low hanging, split by the twigs of this tree, and felt the feeling for the first time ever of, I suppose you don't have to take drugs every day, because my life has been defined by addiction. It was defined by addiction when I was a kid, defined by addiction when I'm an adult, it's still defined by addiction now, as a matter of fact, because the rubric for my sanity and my ongoing spiritual development is built around abstinence from drugs, behaviours, thoughts that lead me back to it, that lead me back to destructive behaviour, destructive thinking, destructive beliefs. The end of it, even after that moment though, I went to a place called Bartok in Chalk Farm Road and waited for Gritty there. I remember calling my mate G, who I used to do the radio show with, and saying, I'm going into a treatment centre. I was scared. I hung out with my mate Carl that night and his girlfriend Karen at the time, just using all the time. Then I went back to my flat. I lived in Spitalfields in East London. I was not paying the rent on that flat, and somehow they'd not noticed I wasn't paying the rent. And I'd been there about 6 months and not paid the rent. I just thought, this will just go on forever. I'll just live in this place. Got annihilated, sat in front of the TV woke up, and I'd missed the train that I was meant to take to go to Bury St Edmunds to the treatment centre where I was going. And then eventually, sort of made my way there, and different friends of mine, Martino, God rest his soul, he visited me there, G, Matt Morgan, Sharon came and visited me in that treatment centre, and I sort of emaciated into it's a kind of crystallization going into treatment. Like a lot of you dies and fades and withers, and you're exposed with the pain, you're exposed to the pain that you have been trying to avoid. I remember the last night of the using very, very clearly, sort of dolefully telling the drug dealer, I'm going into a treatment centre. In the treatment centre, Martino, God rest his soul, deleting the drug dealers from my phone, meeting other people that were clean, going to 12-step groups, hearing about the nature of a step one, list all the times your drug using has caused you problems, has caused you to behave in ways that you regret, has created chaos in your life, that you have continued to act in this way even in spite of it being evident that you can't handle it. All of this sort of flood of confronting my childhood, confronting my pain, something that any addict or alcoholic has to go through, or indeed anybody that's interested in a path of change, that you have to go back and see what it is, why you have formulated the person you are and the strategies you've had. And as I've often said, if your strategies are obviously problematic, like chemical dependency, it's sort of easier. If you have sanctioned addictions, like spending too much money, getting in negative, harmful relationships, thinking negative, crazy stuff, being online all the time, you can carry on for a long, long while. I know that because subsequent to what is known as my primary addiction, chemical dependency, I went through food and sexual behavioural addictions that are just as painful in their own way. Because in a sense, there is a yearning that drives addiction. As I have said to you frequently, what does the wanting want? What is it? When are you going to be happy? When are you going to arrive at this place that you've been pursuing either through passion or passivity? When are you going to arrive there? There is something just beneath the grid of behaviours, the equations that make up the self, just beyond it, there is a second observing mind that can be experienced. It can only be experienced though when you eschew the strategies that are preventing you from having that realization. You are lucky if it's stuff that you can identify. I can't be in this type of relationship. I can't behave in this kind of way. I can't eat this type of food. I can't do this. Now, how am I going to get support in sustaining this? Because, you know, loads of us have had those realizations and return to it. I tried to give up drugs prior to that time when I was sent away. I went down to a cottage with, again, Martino and my then girlfriend Amanda from Barcelona, this phenomenon of a human being that I was wildly in love with then, and sat and watched Alan Bennett videos and smoked loads of dope and drank loads of whiskey and clucked it out and rattled and sweated it away, you know. And it lasted for a few weeks until that relationship went wrong with Amanda because of my conduct, obviously, well, not obviously but actually, and then straight back to the brown and the white, straight back to those relationships, straight back to those streets, straight back to the ancillary streets off Brick Lane where there's a second world of drugs, the accreted layers of culture unseen unless you need to belong to them, of dealers and runners and kids on bikes and blokes in cars pulling over on corners and making quick exchanges, taking things out their cheeks. Maybe it don't go on like that no more. Drugs are different, like spice and bags of mad things that can mess you up, that can be made at home with bathroom products. God help the addicts of today. God help the kids that have got addiction issues now when they can order stuff on their phone or they can lose themselves in porn. God help them, and I mean that literally, God help them, because I suppose my own solution that has been given to me freely has been a spiritual one, and all the things I was looking for in those mad rolling cyclonic days have been found, and some measure of, I wouldn't say normal, but reality has been found, an acceptance of reality, relationships with people that are real, an opportunity to atone for the past, to be of service in the present, and hopefully ongoing in the future, to be a part of the recovery of many people. Hope this video was useful to you, and to some degree, I hope it was amusing and entertaining, and there were bits we thought, yeah, he strung together a good sentence there. Subscribe to this if you're watching it on YouTube, and if you're not, then, well, I suppose you're free to do whatever the hell you like with your time.